Hold it! Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! Now, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Hey, you're listening to another episode of Threshold Saints. This is Jin the Ninja, and enjoy the show. Hey, Chief, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming on. And do you want to just tell people what you're about, what your account's about, if you have any services you offer, and just promo yourself and how you got started?
Well, yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter. I've experimented with other platforms, but it works best for me. So it's at _ Agatsnahi Uktita. You said it perfectly, by the way. And
Well, I did watch that anime, so I should actually know how to say it.
You said you watched the anime.
Well, Princess Uktena. I'm familiar with that anime.
I have never even heard of that. So we can talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
But nah, so I'm mostly on Twitter. If you go to my Twitter page, I have a link tree where you can get to my Gumroad, and it has all of my products and services. So at this point, I have about 75 products or services that's available. I didn't realize I had that many until I had to go and edit them. So anything from normal astrology reading, numerology. I started offering the I Ching as a service for counseling. And then what I'm really promoting now is my monthly service where I just I give spiritual advice and spiritual counseling per month. So you pay a fee per month. There's 4 different tiers, and versus a general consultation, which that's just for one-offs. So if you're someone who is getting readings from me more than once a month, you would spend quite a bit of money. This is in efforts to try to get people to save money with the monthly counseling. And that's pretty much where I'm at now is Twitter and through my Gumroad.
Awesome. I'll make sure that all those links are in the show notes so people can make sure to check you out, subscribe to your Twitter, and also see all your services on Gumroad.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I thought maybe we would start with we can start with dragons or we can start with Ganesh. I'll let you decide. I feel like both of them kind of are important cosmologically and just as kinds of deities of the beginning.
Well, in typical fashion, as tradition dictates, we're going to start with Lord Ganesha. You know what I mean? Because he'll make everything else smooth if we start with him.
Okay, I feel you. Let's do that. So what specifically, what would you say you started with him? What was your initial connection, attraction in your practice? Yeah, I mean, say as much or as little as you want, but just give a little, talk a little bit about him.
So Lord Ganesha, in my, I'll say my learning tree, the teachers that I came up under, they believe that everybody, and I concur, that everyone has a male and a female deity who is responsible for shaping your soul in each incarnation. And so we call it spiritual parents. Like I've talked about it on Twitter at length, and it's actually one of the services and products that I offer. But so Lord Ganesha is my spiritual father, and so how I found that out is really how everybody should be going about it. Like he's just a deity that has been in my life, like all over, and I did not realize it until I did the ritual to find out who for sure. So I remember seeing pictures of him. I remember having dreams, and I've always been surrounded by elephants and stuff like that. But I didn't really come into the full knowledge of the practice and who he was and all this kind of stuff, who he is, until about 2019, somewhere around there, 2019 and 2020. And so my particular practice is, of course, I have an altar set up for him. I do my rituals, my mantras, my mudras. So I have an altar built for Lord Ganesha, and that's how I start my day is with veneration and conversation with Lord Ganesha. And that includes like my offerings, the mantras, the mudras, that type of thing. So of course everybody should be familiar with Lord Ganesh. He has his own mudra. He has quite a few mantras depending on which aspect you're dealing with. But that's generally how I work with him out like on a daily basis.
I personally think that's great. I think that Ganesh is a great deity. I think, in like a more religious tantra, you have to understand. I mean, most people will have like at least one of the tantric kinds of form mantras. So cannot overemphasize how important he is personally for me as well, in just like how I begin even my Buddhist prayers. It begins with like a little sandalwood offering and a mantra. So to him.
Hmm.
So I totally respect and appreciate that. So since now that we've kind of like made it past the first store, we'll say, um, can you give people like just a little background on how you kind of have realized and recognized your own spiritual gifts and how you've come to sort of this place to be able to coach people and offer spiritual counseling?
That's actually a great question, and it ties into the first question in that the gifts that you have, more than likely, when you realize the deity that you're linked to, they're going to be attributes and traits and gifts that deity is most known for. Of course, as a god or an angel, I mean, they can pretty much do anything, but there are certain things that they're known for. And so, Lord Ganesha, um, being mercurial in nature, like I've always been good with words. I've always been good with communicating with people, and I've always had a really easy time in helping people feel at peace. Um, with talking to me and giving me like their real stories. I've never had to encounter people where they're like giving me a bunch of uh falsehoods. Like normally when they're around me, like people just want to spill their guts. And so like I didn't realize what it was until I went on my own journey and I started to come up under my master teachers. And one of my teachers, he was saying how the everyone has a gift, and the main three spiritual gifts are counseling, healing, and teaching. And so when I had my sessions with him and I was breaking down how my life was going, he was like, "You're definitely have a mix of them," but he was saying like you're mostly a counselor and then a teacher and then some healing by way of counseling. And so that's that's not something that I accepted right away because I'm kind of like to myself, kind of a bit of a hermit. I just want to do my thing, learn, gather knowledge, do my own practices and all that kind of stuff. But I learned that if I was going to evolve and ascend in this lifetime, I had to help others, get through their blocks. Like Organesh is the remover of obstacles. And so me helping other people by counseling, helping them remove their blocks helps me evolve as well. And so I've been in this space about 8 years in learning as far as the counseling goes, 8 to 10 years in learning. And then in the counseling part, I've probably been doing my whole life, but been focused on spiritual guidance. And it's probably about 4 years now.
Well, awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. I personally
Hmm.
find you very fascinating, and you kind of are, in my mind at least, but maybe you also agree with this, is that you're kind of I distinguish you from the rest of spiritual Twitter in several ways, is that you often have your own opinions in the sense that you have your opinions and you don't necessarily bend to other, like, what is the popular spiritual Twitter discourse. Like, you are very strong in your own kind of thinking. I really appreciate that. And I think that you don't fall prey necessarily to the trends. You kind of have an idea of what you want to say and what you want to teach and the ways that you want to present it. And it's not all love and light, but I think that that's actually, but you do say it in a calm way. So I do definitely appreciate that from my perspective.
I'm so glad you said that. With the rest of spiritual Twitter, I think that people have gotten away from what spirituality is about, and I attribute that to one of my master teachers. Is the main purpose of all of this is to evolve. And so people on Twitter and in the spiritual space in general, they've gotten caught up in doing spells, manifestation, uh, getting revenge, all these different types of things that they're trying to do using the metaphysics, trying to delve into the occult. But the original point of all of this is to evolve. And so when I see a practice or when I see something being pushed, I look at it from that lens. Like, does this help move the needle in terms of adding light to the soul? Does this move the needle in terms of helping people um, get out of this portion of the matrix? And most of spirituality doesn't do that, because most of spiritual Twitter, I don't think they read, I don't think they study, and I don't think they really apply. I think they just regurgitate. And so that's probably why I sound so different. I made a tweet about that like maybe a year ago, and I retweeted every now and again as far as my takes on the occult sounding different. And I'm like, they're supposed to. Like, I read, I studied, then I applied it, and then I came away with my own snippet of it. Like, the reason why that's the reason why it sounds different is because it's actual knowledge mixed with experience. It's supposed to make it distinct. Does that make sense?
100%. I mean, I'm totally with you, Chief. I am like, I'm not anti-magic because I understand that there's a time and a place where you might need to push something through. But
Yeah.
so that is its own trap. It's its own kleepath to even say that out loud, because people, exactly like what you said, do get very caught up in those kind of low works. And they do not really, the whole point of it is exactly, I mean, that's what I've tried to even do with the show and have different people on talking about kind of different, in different ways, not necessarily spirituality, but I think there is something about how to move through time and space and
Hmm.
evolving through those kinds of things that that we do to move through. And also, like, not getting caught up in like the kinds of like things that we attribute to ourselves, like our identities, and then just kind of we kind of like, yes, we can acknowledge it, and then we can also just let it go. So
Right, right.
yeah, so I totally agree with you. I think that is what sets you apart. I think there's a whole kind of like group emerging, and I think there's a group that has emerged around you and several others. And interestingly enough, they're all African American, which I find very fascinating. That there is kind of like this, I don't know, it's like a new kind of spirituality that is not focused on like it's not revenge, it's not black magic, it's not, it's not bullshit. It's just, we're going to like focus on Thurgy and we're going to like evolve ourselves.
I'm
So
so glad you said that part as well, because I don't know if you're familiar. You probably are if you're in this space, but like Bobby Hemmett and Brother Panic, you've heard of them?
I have not heard of them. I have not heard of them.
Okay,
I
so when
I the Buddhist Twitter, but I do dabble a little bit into the other ones. But you can tell
no,
me.
and I appreciate that you helped me tremendously, even as recently as like 2 weeks ago. I think you posted this because I have like 3 or 4 books on the I Ching, and then you posted this other one by this other author. I forget her name. And
Oh, Ben Bell, yes. I love that book.
oh yeah, I bought it as soon as you posted it. I was like, oh, this is fire. So I went and got it. So I really appreciate that. No, but so in the we'll just say call it the African American space, it's been mostly revenge and dark magic, in my opinion. And I think that's by design because in the African American culture, we're very spiritual. We're always in church or the mosque or even the synagogue. We're always, even if we're not there, there's something about our culture where we're always in tune with spirit. And so in late 80s, early 90s, and through the 90s and early 2000s, there was this move. I will say it was started by or promoted heavily by brother Bobby Hemmett, rest in peace. Well, actually, I don't think he's passed away, but brother Panic he's passed away. Um, and most of it was about like he would give the knowledge, but the tent on it was to use the voodoo and use the occult and use all the metaphysics and magic for the purpose of like like getting back at people or getting back at the white man or taking back your power, which I'm a fan of taking back your power, but there was so much hate in it. You know what I mean? And I was like, now that because I like most people, if you talk to any of the black people in quote unquote black people in this space, they will say at some point they learned from Bobby Hemmett or Brother Panic or C.L. Freeman or Dr. Phil Valentine, those people. And in my opinion, Bobby Hemmett, he came with that. It was very dark. People were swearing up a storm, thinking that they can move in that space. And a lot of things they were doing, like if you're move, it was almost left hand path, but it's not. It was pseudo left hand path. And so they were doing this stuff, and I was like, y'all. First of all, he's not telling you a way to evolve using this stuff. He's giving you a bunch of spells, and the energy he's trying to get you to tap into. Y'all don't know how to transmute that. You don't live a lifestyle that's conducive to what he's doing. And so I really think he was a plant. I think that he's a plant. And so when you talk about the people that are coming up now, myself included, we look at what he did because he was teaching for like 20 years. That whole movement was going on for about 20 years. And now we're looking at it like that didn't really help us any. Like having this animosity or anger or trying to approach the occult in that way, it didn't move the culture forward. And so now we're getting past the anger and the race relations. Like I don't believe in any of that. So I've met people from all walks of life who are just as in tune as I am. You know what I mean? And when you study different cultures, you see that they have their own system of magic, but it's no less powerful regardless of what the culture is. You know what I'm saying?
I totally agree with you. I try and be post-racial in my thinking. Obviously, Twitter kind of brings out like you can be funny racist sometimes, and that's okay once in a while. But I definitely, in my like everyday life, I think that to have this kind of like, yes, okay, it exists, it's real, but like it's real, but it's also bullshit in a way. And I totally agree with you that there have been many spiritual kind of plants or like people who are teaching kind of like this inverted or pseudo left-hand path. And I think that's a great way to describe it because that's also how I came up. Like I never thought of myself as left-hand path, but I obviously was very engaged, very angry at the world, very left wing in my politics especially when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that all attributed to kind of like an externalization of practices that were really meant for internal theurgy.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But yeah, it's if you're tapped in at this point in time, you realize it's all about the spirit. It's all about the soul. Like it's not about race.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about skin color. I'll say that at this point in the story. I think at some point it did have its place, but that time is long since gone. You're going to see just as many people ascend that are, say, white as there are black, as there are Chinese, as there are Indian, whatever. It's about have you done the work, the spiritual work to add light to your soul, or haven't you? It's not going to, and that's another thing that I think it was so, why I think it was a plant is because they made people in the black community lazy because they're like, you have melanin, so you got a leg up. You don't need to do all this other kind of stuff. It's kind of the message that they were giving. And I was like, no, that you still got to do your work. Like being born black doesn't give you a key to the next realm. You know what I mean?
Sorry about that. Yes, no, I totally agree with you. I think that's a great point. I personally do not like that kind of theosophy of like, oh, like the assigning magical attributes to like each of the five mystical origin races. Like I'm not about that. I'm exactly like what you're saying. Like everyone can do dharma, everyone can do the work. Just you have to do it. You can't just like be
Right.
like, oh, I'm so great or I'm so accomplished or I have like this city or this city, and like okay, that's great, but like what are you doing every day to make sure that that continues, because cities can come and go. So
Hmm.
I totally agree with you that it is about like your daily practice and also how much you're integrating that. It's not really about who you are or who you think you are.
Right. You have to do the work, and that's a common pitfall that I see that most of my clientele come from is that they're at the point where they've had their aha moment where they're like, okay, I know the world isn't what it seems. I know that something is different than what they told me. So they go down the rabbit hole. We're both guilty of it. We both go down the rabbit hole, get a bunch of knowledge, but they're at that point like, okay, now what do I do with it? And then most people get stuck there. They're not doing anything with it. They're just holding it over other people like, oh, I know this more than you. But what are you doing? And that's where we're at with most of spirituality.
Totally agree. And I also will say that like a lot of people that I've learned from were Jamaican, were people who practice like Obeah or um,
Hmm.
from Trinidad or practice Shango. So I am familiar with like the Afro-syncretic spirituality, like very much so.
Right.
And so I really have a strong appreciation for it. But at the same time, like I do see how much you could channel some of those ideas. And it's not that the ideas in and of themselves are like anti-cosmic or negative, but they're it because you're
You're breaking
working.
up a little bit.
Oh, okay. I apologize. It's raining here. Maybe that's why. How's that now?
Try one more time.
How's that? Is that better?
Okay, there we go.
Okay. Sorry about that. It's in the middle of a storm, so you know.
It's all good.
Okay. Well, I just was saying that I think that any path can be used for negative purpose, and but I do think it strongly depends on the energies that you're working with. I do think people
Mhm.
often take on more than they can handle, and like you said, it's hard for them to transmute sort of the intensity of the things. Like I know even for me, like I was like, okay, I can handle like this current, this like death energy or this thing, and I probably couldn't at that moment. It was probably definitely not the right thing for me. But I had that ego where I was like, oh, I can definitely do it. Like so
Yeah,
yeah, so I appreciate that, everybody does come to that pivot point where you don't where you kind of think you know it all, but then you're kind of also stuck. And in those times, that's when the practice really comes in handy or really is important, because it really pushing through always is like I always find that to be the remedy for myself.
for sure. And that's why I think I tweeted this out like a couple weeks ago. I said that like my tweets would make more sense if you were actually doing spiritual work. You know what I mean? Like there's certain you reach a level where the book or the course or the teacher has given you the substance, but until you apply it, you're not going to know what to do next. You're not going to know the question to ask next because you're not actually putting this stuff into play. You know what I mean?
hmm I totally agree. I do think that the especially the and I don't think it's just limited to like black spiritual Twitter or anything like that. I think, but the cursing thing is so strong in the occult. Like, there are people that think like left hand path is just doing whatever you want and just having fun.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that is like completely like inversionary to my experience and to like all the texts that I've read and stuff. It's
Absolutely.
right. And I think you agree with this, and you talk about this a lot, and just how, it really is the inner transmutation. So it's taking those destructive energies, and just like Ganesh does, like he has that daytime form and also a nighttime form. And he has that ability to kind of turn the smoke of delusion into knowledge, into true knowledge. And where his daytime form is more of the, he's the external king of knowledge. But then he can raise his left hand in his mudra and then kind of turn that energy, that dragon energy, into something else. But if you externalize it, you are going to sort of like stay stuck in the smoke of delusion. That's at least how I would describe it.
No, I completely agree, because I try to tell people, like, if you really, until this is a part of that's lost, like if you actually study the mythology and the lore and the text, you'll see that Lord Ganesha he'll obstacles, and he also puts them in play. Like if
Yes.
you're not doing what you're supposed to do, and you can't discount that he's mercurial. He's a gatekeeper, and he has like you said, a trickster aspect. But again, the way to see through the trick is to do the work. You get what I'm saying? So, but we're saying the same thing.
Okay, well, I'm glad that we're on the same page on that. I knew we would be, but I
Yeah.
think it's interesting to say it's different than in a tweet, right? Like to have a dialogue.
Yes.
So I thought I would ask you about something that I'm very unfamiliar with. So you'll have to excuse me if I say something not intelligent about it. But you seem to have a very good grasp of crystals and how to use them. And you don't
Yeah.
also adhere to the more, I guess, like astrology e-girl, kind of like use crystals for all your manifestation purposes. And of course, I'm, again, superficial in my knowledge, but just talk a little bit about your approach to crystals, if you think they're important, which ones you particularly like, and obviously don't give too much away, like, people go by your course, but just talk a little bit about things that you think are important and demystify some of those like common misconceptions about certain ones.
So, in my experience and this applies to most things in my practice, that has been the key for me, is understanding that whatever you're doing is about the relationship. And so, I think where most people are in the dark about crystals is that they treat them like they're not alive. They treat them like they're not sentient. And so, that's my approach, is that I have evolved myself to the point where I can hear my crystals, and I know what they're here to do, and what they represent. But in general, um, so crystals are sentient, so that's the first point. And when you treat them as such, and that's something I tell my clients, is like, hey, look, I want you to treat this like your best friend. I don't want you to drop it. I don't want you to leave it somewhere. Like, consider this like something that you're responsible for, because the relationship is what is most important. Like, they'll be able to feel holes in your aura, help you evolve to, or help you develop certain energies if they're around you long enough. And certain crystals, they're called elder crystals, that you don't even have to program. They just do what they're supposed to do. But in general, I think the problem with most people with crystals, other than the fact that they don't treat them like they're living beings, is that they don't take the time to make sure they're properly cleansed, to make sure they're properly fed, and to make sure they're properly programmed. And so those big things right there, you're basically, and they're most people's crystals not even activated, because crystals, and it's crazy. I was tweeting about this earlier. Crystals, when they're in, because the main faculty of a crystal, other than helping the environment they're in or the person that they're with, is they absorb information. And so if you have a crystal that is in a toxic environment, or around a toxic person, let's say you're at a crystal store, because that's where most people get their stuff. You're at a crystal store, and that crystal store is filled with negative people, has been touched by negative people or whatever. or it's gone through the mail and it's been in negative environments, whatever, those crystals will shut down. And so most people, they're walking around because they don't have a high enough consciousness to understand what's going on with their crystals. They don't even know it's shut down. So it's not really doing anything. And so the cleansing, the deep cleansing is important. The feeding is important because they feed off information, they feed off knowledge, and then the programming. Like I said, some crystals, I'll give an example, like a labradorite, that's an elder crystal. You don't have to program a labradorite to do anything. It'll automatically jump in and start to try to balance the right and left hemispheres of your brain. It'll start to balance your energy. And it'll actually teach you stuff. Like you don't have to program with anything. But other crystals, they need to be purposed, activated, cleansed, and purposed. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was incredible knowledge drop. So thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
What I know you have a sort of different take on black tourmaline. Do you want to just say a couple of things about that?
Oh yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up because I almost want to leave it for people to like discover on their own, but like then the light part of me won't let that happen. Like so, black tourmaline and black obsidian, those are two crystals that you will see heavily promoted, and I think that's a psyop, heavily promoted in the crystal community. Either it's a psyop or they just don't know. So black tourmaline it has trickster energy to it. After a while, the best thing I can relate it to is like a cow or some other dog that's notorious for turning and turn on its master. Black tourmaline will do that. And it takes an experienced magician or energy worker to be able to hear it and understand when that's happening. And so I don't recommend the run-of-the-mill person to just go out and get black tourmaline. And then a black obsidian, that's used for portals. And that also siphons energy off as well. So if you're the regular person who hasn't taken the time to cleanse, program, and purpose your crystal, you're going to end up with holes in your aura. So even if you did everything you're supposed to do, like cleansing your aura, protecting your aura, all that kind of stuff, but you're carrying, like a cell phone, you're carrying black obsidian in your aura, you pretty much just have a open portal right through it. So I don't recommend people carrying those either. Think of it like a black hole. Like you wouldn't carry around a black hole because of what it can do. But yeah, black tourmaline, black obsidian, I don't recommend those. If people are getting started with crystals and they need something for grounding, I recommend black onyx. That's a better crystal. Or jet. That's a better crystal. Or hematite. That's the better crystal to do your grounding and protecting.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because that is something that I've noticed. And again, I don't know the contemporary kind of metaphysics of crystals. I'm very traditional in my knowledge base, and it really comes from Jyotish, and obviously we use offering crystals in Buddhism. But I totally agree with you that the black crystals are generally assigned to Rahu, the dragon of the eclipse. So in general, they are considered to be quite malefic for most people. Now, that's not 100% true, but for most people, they are not going to be beneficial. So I think that is an interesting thing where your knowledge and sort of my knowledge, it very much kind of affirms what you're saying. Right. And I agree. And I'm a big onyx person myself, and where I live, you can wild harvest really huge chunks of both jet and onyx from the beach. So I think that's really
awesome.
Yeah, so I do have a little collection, but yeah, that was amazing.
And that speaks to what I was saying. It doesn't matter, because I'll tell people hey, look, you need to get into a system of magic so you can understand the basics, principles of it. And I'll tell people hey, go learn about Wicca. And they'll look at me, because these are black people, African Americans, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And Wicca, that's for white people. I'm like, what is magic? You know what I mean? Or I tell people hey, look, in my profile picture on Twitter, hey, that's a Scandinavian or Norse symbol. Oh, you're using white people magic. I'm like, it's magic. What are you talking about? I just want the most powerful magic. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So here, cross culturally, I'm saying something, and then you're practicing, and another coach is telling you the same thing. It speaks to exactly what I was trying to say. Like it doesn't matter. Magic is magic.
100%. Wisdom science is wisdom science. Magic is magic.
Right.
I agree with that. Like that's exactly right. Like I can't really add to it, but you want the most powerful thing for yourself. I didn't start out with Wicca, but I have met many magicians, many, like who have started out with Wicca. And of course, they discard it at one point, like when they get to a higher level. But for base text knowledge, that is a perfectly respectable place to start. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
So, and we all need a base to start. Like, you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to go read, like, I don't know, some crazy grimoire right away. Like, nobody can do that. And there's zero people that can do that. So, yeah, I agree. Get a base knowledge before you try.
Exactly. A lot of my clients, man, when they come to me, they always want the most advanced stuff. And I'm like, if you actually, first of all, you don't have the energy for this. Like,
Mhm.
even if you could understand it.
Yeah,
But if you did this, you would hurt yourself. Like, this is not for the beginning. For a beginner, you need a foundation of energy in order to do this. So, but yeah,
no,
I'm here to help change that. Like, get people back to the fundamentals.
well, I think you do a great job of that. So that's why I brought up the black tourmaline, because I knew that your take was very different than the other ones I had seen on that particular subject. So,
Mhm.
so I thought maybe this would maybe a good time to move into. Now, this is not something that I talk about, but people ask me about it often because they know I'm a tantric Buddhist. But you have the best takes, so people should really ask you, or so buy a service. But sex. So you seem to have the best grasp of it that and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show or whatever, but you seem to have a very strong grasp of the energy exchange of like how dangerous sex magic is, how like even just casual kind of encounter sex can be very like karmically entwining slash damaging slash dangerous. So could you
Yeah.
just give a little bit of your take on that, because I just think it's very fresh and it's not, it's very like people love Manly P. Hall and people love all that theosophy, sex magic stuff, and I'm very like not into that, but I think that you can probably do a good job of explaining like why to be wary of it.
So, okay, to understand the sex energy from my perspective, you have to understand the levels of power for different energies. So joy, well, I'll take that back. Love is the most powerful energy, followed by joy, and then there's sex energy. And most people, well, so love is completely, and I know I'm going a long way, but I'm going somewhere. So love is mostly completely uncontrollable at this in this realm, in this dimension. It just love happens to you. You know what I mean? Then joy, most people, and I'm trying to change that, cannot spontaneously or at will manifest joy or tap into joy, because most people have unbalanced or blocked heart chakras. Sex is the most powerful energy that most people have the ability to tap into, and I think it's a psyop that they have people, misusing it. So the other part that you have to tap into and understand for sex energy is soul groups. So you're only ever, according to my learnings and my master teachers and what I've seen through many astrology readings, is that you're only ever exchanging that energy with the same soul group. My teacher likes to say, if you had sex with a person in this lifetime, you've had a sex with that person in a previous lifetime. Even the random fling, you're always exchanging the same energy. And so that has to do with soul groups. But anyway, so what we're normally talking about when we talk about sex energy is in the casualness of it is we're wasting it. For one, for males, wasting our seed, because you only have, like, you'll be able to continue to reproduce with sperm, like you'll always be able to do that, and semen, But the light, the liquid light, you can run out of that. And then our culture has pretty much promoted like sex and excess as if you can't lose that energy. Um, and so I'm really big on people taking the time to cleanse themselves prior to like pretty much every day, or not every day, but like once a week at least, depending on how population dense your area is in what your line of work is. But definitely after sex, if you haven't taken the time to vet this person, you need to be conscious of what parasites that people are leaving on you. So in sex, the two auras, hopefully mostly it's just two people, the two auras, they're combining to form one aura. And so whatever a person has on them, they're going to give to you. So all disease starts in the etheric realm. And so if someone has a parasite, like a lying spirit or a thieving spirit, or just one of depression or sadness or anger, they're going to pass that on to you. So it's very important that you should be vetting these people. You should be cleansing yourself so that you can recognize your own energy prior to engaging with someone on that intimate of a level. But if you haven't, I mean, we're all human. If you haven't, you definitely need to take the time to do your baths, your spiritual baths. You need to take the time to do cord cutting rituals, because if that's not somebody who has a positive energy, then they're just siphoning off of you. And I think I've tweeted this before, is that you are that's really where your wealth energy is being siphoned off into, is by having negative sex partners here in this life and in previous lives. But I can go on for days talking about that. Is there another aspect of that you want me to delve into?
Well, I think that that's just, I mean, you can definitely keep going with that. I find this very fascinating. It also, again, corresponds, I just like, just, it just reminds me that all wisdom science is exactly the same, because we think of it exactly the same in Buddhism. Like love is your highest principle, but it's the
Mm-hmm.
hardest to control. It's the pink. Pink is the kind of discoherence of the meeting of blue and red. So it kind of is like energy of creation and destruction, but it doesn't have a particular will. So it just is. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
it can be both things. And just our consciousness is what kind of taps into its either creative or destructive force. So that was really, I thought, very similar. Joy, we call it bliss, exactly the
Mm.
same. Very difficult to tap into, but it's possible, and we need to try and tap into that all the time. And even during profound moments of sadness, like this is something that I spoke with another guest about, but that like at the end of when you finish your sadhana, you kind of have these profound moments of sadness when it's over, but there
Mm-hmm.
is a kind of joy in that as well. So I found
Mm.
that interesting. And then the sex thing, yes, it really confirms everything that I've ever been taught, when from lamas or from dharma talks or from any or from magic or from my occult studies. Just it instantly creates a karmic connection. And so if you had relations with someone in this life, you will definitely be forming a karmic and cosmic connection to them for the next life. And exactly like what you said, it might even speak to a past karmic or cosmic relationship in the past. So,
For sure. For sure.
and right, and we live in exactly like you said, we live in a culture that really has this kind of infinite. We promote the idea of the infinite kind of like seed, or the infinite light in the seed, and I think that that is very inversionary. I think that that's wrong, and like exactly what you said, because you know and it's wealth practice and sex magic are very similar things, and they come from a similar energy center in the body. So I totally agree with you, and I really appreciate that you said that.
Yeah, no problem. And just to add on to it for a little bit, that is really, because I don't want to demonize sex. Like sex has its
No,
place. Yeah,
not at all.
I want to say that, but what it is the abuse and the unfocused energy of sex that's really going on right now. Because whenever you have like if you're using your sex energy whether it be by yourself or with a partner or in a group, if there's not a goal or a focus for that energy, what end up happening is you'll have these lower negative beings that just come around you to absorb that energy. And so if you're someone who's a chronic masturbator, or man or woman, or you're just having meaningless sex with someone and you're just like mindless, your home is probably filled with these negative beings that are just waiting for you to release that orgasm energy so they can siphon it off.
100%. You're totally, and I'm not anti-sex at all. Like, I'm pro, like, people should have, like, the householder is the strongest metaphysical position in my opinion. So I definitely believe in people like having familial relations and having like partner, whatever, wife, husband, whatever, or girlfriend, whatever it is. But like, I'm against the idea of the meaningless relationship or the meaningless casual, not just casual, because casual is sometimes that is, just how the world is. But there's also that thing where you just have meaningless relationships with random people. And I think that can be very karmically damaging. And that is what I've been told many times. Like, it's just inappropriate just from a karmic conduct perspective, because you are creating relationships with people you might not even know their name. You might not know their histories. You might not know, like, and you're entangling yourself with them.
And I know some pretty powerful occultists who they're not attached to anybody, so they do sleep around, but it's always intentional, and they always take the time to cleanse themselves and their aura afterwards.
I think if you know what you're doing, then live your life. But I think there's also the trap that I think that people, sometimes you might hook up with someone and they might be a magician, and they might be having intention, and you're just doing it mindlessly and without intention, and you're kind of feeding into their thing and kind of being siphoned off of. So I think that people
absolutely
need to be wary of that.
Absolutely. In Montauk Chia's book, I think it's the male version of talking about I forget what it's called, but if you get a Montauk Chia book and it's about the male energy, the male sex energy, in that book he talks about a process called the big draw, where older men who know how to do it will sleep with the younger women, and they'll just siphon their youth energy, siphon their sex energy off, and it feeds their body. So there's definitely some parasites out there who know what they're doing. So you definitely got to be careful and protect yourself.
Yeah, 100% protection is paramount, I would say. So why don't we talk about that for a few minutes at least? Protection. Like, what is your advice? How would you tell people to go about doing it? What is your preferred method? You don't have to say for yourself, but just for for someone who's like more beginner / intermediate.
So for protection, I like to use. I actually did a presentation on this back in December. I would say protection magic is one of my area of expertise outside of like ancestral work or altar work and evolutionary work. But for protection, you definitely need to have a routine that is something that you will do. Like, you don't need the most elaborate thing. But I use, just to give a small overview, I use the inside out method. So starting with cleansing yourself, and you can use anything as basic as sage or Palo Santo, some type of spiritual bath or some type of frequency. And doing the same thing with your home. And so once you've done some type of cleansing to your home, there's many methods that you could do. Once you've cleansed your home, the very next thing you need to do is start to put up the warding, because that's where most people fail, is that they don't design their home or put up certain symbols or certain things in place that'll keep their home from being reinvaded by negative energy. So I recommend that. And then for personal, of course, you need some type of, if you haven't done the inner work to raise your aura to the point where you're giving off enough light that you can resist the influence of lower negative beings, you definitely need to tap into some type of crystal like the ones we talked about earlier. or some type of medallion, some type of symbol, pentagrams, the helm of all, the Vajara, different symbols like that that you can use to keep your aura from being penetrated or attached to. So the key to that, the point of it is so you can differentiate between what is your energy and thoughts and what is something that has been trying to influence you. But that's another topic that you can go. I can talk hours about spiritual protection and different methods. But the basics, you want to cleanse yourself, cleanse your home, and then put up protections so you don't keep getting reinfected. We'll say, and then you do your tune-ups. You do your monthly checks on the different wardings and protections that you put up on yourself and your home, even your car.
Oh yeah, definitely car. I know that this is something very common among like Chinese people and Tibetans. They will often have like people bless their car, especially new cars. But or obviously if you're buying a car, but it can be used, but it's new to you, to cleanse it out, to have it be. And it does. You don't have to hire someone to do it per se, but that's just one way that people do it. And I totally agree with everything that you said. I think it's so important. I think you can just not, that is where people should invest, I think, money, the most money, for if you're really doing magic. I think that your protection is like number one. And
Absolutely.
one of the investments, and I think you totally said this, but I'll just say it again, is that the investment should partly be your time in doing that work. And that doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a specific, be like, okay, I'm going to do like this practice or worship this angel or Michael. I mean, yes, you can do that. Of course you can do that. But I think it's really important to like have the continuous practice. Like something from Tantra I know, and we'll just use Ganesh because we've spoken about him so much. If you are very good, if you are very like a strong Ganapati Upasaka, that he will protect you. But
Hmm.
when you let that practice kind of decline or go, or you don't do it for a few weeks, or you're not doing your daily sort of practices, that protection wanes. So I think for people to hear that, it's really important to have a daily practice, and it will really carry with you through all of your works.
That and to bring it full circle, that is exactly why I start my day with Lord Ganesha, asking him for his protection to remove obstacles from my path, blessing my day. Because, and this goes to another level, that because I think when most people hear about spiritual protection, they just think themselves, maybe they think about their homes, maybe even their car. But if you don't have a good routine, and if you're not working with a higher being, there are actual beings, demons, lower demonics, who will steal your wealth energy, who will steal your health energy, who will destroy your relationships. Like, the protection goes, it's not something to take lightly. And I 100% agree with you that should be the foundation. Along with ancestral work, that protection magic should be like the foundation of what you do, so that you're not influenced negatively and you're not bought down, like all of your work is going to for naught because you have all of these energy thieves.
I totally agree with you. Like demons are real, even not demons, even like lower ghosts, lower like hungry
Right.
ghosts.
Yep.
All and there's other things like people go. I know probably this is not so much like Black Twitter, spiritual Twitter does this, but definitely you see this a lot with like white pagan Twitter, where they will like worship like every tree and like leave offerings for the fairies. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like screaming like, don't do that, like don't do that, because you don't know what kind of yakshas those are. You don't have, unless you're really like in tune, you don't know. So you have to be really careful with like what you worship and what you're doing externally, because externally is a ritual, regardless if you're
I'm
doing it or not.
and I mean cut you off. I'm so glad you said that, because trees are very, very powerful, and most people don't, because they can't see ghosts. If you do have the eyes to see, most of the time you'll see a spirit or a ghost. They're next to a tree. And if it's a big tree, it's probably like three or four ghosts there, but they don't see it. And so, like you said, with pagan Twitter or people who are just getting into it, they like, oh, I'm gonna go hug a tree. I'm gonna go meditate under this tree. you you better wear some protection, or you better develop a relationship with that tree, because you have no idea what's around it. You know what I mean?
No, 100%. I know, like, because I have a Southeast Asian background, that we believe that, like, the sort of the female, sort of like Rakshinis and Yakshinis and Pisachis, which are like cannibal kind of female demons, not necessarily cannibals in the physical way, but definitely things that could siphon energy off of both men and women. They live in certain kinds of trees. So just because it's a tree does not necessarily mean it is your friend. And I actually know that that's a common kind of like East African belief as well, especially for fruit trees, banana trees, banyan trees, and as well in South India. It's also very
Mm,
common. Specific spirits will live in trees. So yes, be careful. Just don't worship whatever, you know.
right, right. Again, bringing it back to the beginning, it's about developing a relationship. And so if you develop that relationship, you'll pick up on what that energy that tree is giving off before you start to try to, work with it further.
I totally agree. I thought maybe it would be interesting. I didn't write this as a note, but since you brought it up, this is something like I'm not a pagan personally. I don't identify like with that, but I think for people who aren't, there's a lot of emphasis on ancestor worship, particularly among like we'll say the Black spiritual community. So I think that hearing you talk about it is interesting because people don't really have that common frame of reference, especially for white people.
Mm.
So if you want to say something like about the importance of it and how like to foundationally understand it, I think that would be really interesting.
So the ancestor work, in my opinion and experience, the ancestor work is the foundation for all of the magic that you do, because the ancestors on a subatomic level, they live inside of you. And so it's almost like trying to, you know, address the exterior without addressing the interior. And then, of course, you can go, there's levels to all of this where you can say all the gods are inside of you, whatever, whatever. But the ancestors, for sure, they live in you, in your DNA. And so until you address the own flaws in your DNA, the own flaws in your character, it's going to be much more difficult to develop a relationship with a higher deity and get something out of that relationship. Um, and so, in my opinion, if someone's going to start working with spirits, the spirits that you should work with first are the ones that are in your bloodline, your ancestors. And it could be as small as, giving libations. It could be as small as you just saying prayers. But you got to do something to give your ancestors energy, because just because they have departed doesn't mean they're not still on their own spiritual evolution journey. And so many of us have ancestors who have relatives who are deceased that didn't do any spiritual work when they passed away. And so they don't have any energy once they die. Most of them don't even know that they've died. They're either in some type of limbo state, or if they've died in a way that was traumatic and quick, they're still going about their perceived life as if everything is fine and they're actually dead. And so, and then you have other ancestors who've lived a certain quality of life, and they're actually in what's called a hell state. I call them a hell state, and where they're in the lower dimensions, the second dimension, and they, of course, they put themselves there. Like, there is no God to put you in hell, in my opinion. You put yourself there by your expectations of and your judgments of what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't give them energy, spiritual energy, by way of ancestor money, or by way of prayers, by way of offerings and all this kind of stuff, you're really limiting what you could be doing. You're really limiting your own evolution. And so I know people want to jump to worshiping the God, or working with a God, or working with an angel, or working with a demon, or working with a fairy, or whatever. But you really should start at home, and then your work with the other deity will be amplified.
I mean, that was incredible. I totally agree with you. I think that it is the spiritual foundation of sort of like going up the tree, if you want to describe it in that way. I think
Yeah.
that you need an understanding. I think yes, exactly what you said. It's inside of you, it's not necessarily external. And you are liberating those spirits, those ancestors who don't necessarily have the spiritual potential in their death or in their life, like because they didn't practice spirituality. So I
Hmm.
agree with you, and I think it's really important for people to hear that. And I think for people who don't come from cultures where ancestor veneration is practiced, I think they need to hear from people who definitely have a closer cultural connection. So I really appreciate that. I thought that was very well said.
Yeah, no problem.
I thought maybe we're coming up a little bit close to time, but not quite. I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about wealth practices. What do you think?
Yeah, that's so. It's tied to the rest of spirituality, and see, this is it's another psyop in my opinion by, we can say, the elites, but whatever they are, they made people believe that your wealth isn't tied to your caliber of evolution or soul when
Hmm.
it directly is. Like, you're not here to suffer, you're not here to be miserable, and you're not here to have an experience where you have to be devoid of pleasures and the things that come with wealth. Um, and so, in my opinion, the best way to start to have wealth flow into your life, have money, the energy of money, because money is an energy, is a
Hmm.
current,
Hmm.
to flow into your life, is what we just talked about, which is ancestor work. Because, and I don't know if you believe this or not, but this is what I've learned and what has been evident in my work, is that the ruler of not the creator, the ruler of our realm is a being called the Jade Emperor. I don't know if you're familiar with him. You probably have heard of him before. But the Jade Emperor, um, he used to be human and he went through the process of self deification, and he's really big on ancestors. And so the reason why I say all that is because there's a certain amount of wealth or energy or money or whatever you want to call it, or blessings that you have earned, but they're not going to you, because the Jade Emperor will make sure your ancestors get that energy before you do. And so, to put it in plain terms, if you're not taking care of your ancestors, you're really not getting all of your blessings. They're being siphoned off, we'll say that word, to your ancestors. So when you put that energy back into your ancestors on your own, the blessings that you're supposed to have can come to you, for one. Then what I would recommend other people to do, once they have a good ancestral practice, you should work with a money god. You should work with a wealth god. There are beings who are in positions of money and power and wealth for a reason. It is because that's a part of your experience. So Lord Ganesh is definitely one. Lakshmi is one. Of course, the Jade Emperor is one. Um, Kubera. There's a bunch of wealth deities. The Archangel Barakiel. There's a goddess Fortuna. There's a bunch of deities that you can work with,
Hmm.
to bring that wealth energy into your life.
Wow, that was a knowledge drop for sure. I am so fascinated now that you brought up the Jade Emperor. And I notice this a lot about things that you post about how you do have sort of a very strong, actually, understanding of the Chinese cosmology in particular. And I'm very impressed with that because it is not that common to see. I mean,
Thank you.
there are people that talk about it for sure. Not necessarily people I agree with, but I have to say, like, I've never seen you do a bad take on it. So,
Thank you.
uh, so it's interesting for me, and I do think there's a lot of overlaps between sort of like, well, I'll just give the example I'm thinking of. So Guandi or Guan Yu, as most people know him as, he's often also worshipped sometimes in Santeria as a form
Mm,
of Chang'o, because he was brought there by the Cantonese coolies in the early 1900s to Cuba. So
interesting.
there is a kind of very interesting, and I'm going to do a show on Obeah with someone. I'm not going to say who the guest is yet, but he's going to come on. We're going to talk about this. And there is a kind of interesting overlap, especially in the Caribbean, between sort of like this higher Taoist kind of cosmological way of thinking and this kind of like left-hand path's more Afrosyncretic sorcery. So I'm very
Mm.
fascinated by this.
Yeah, I I definitely, if I had to pick a culture, I would definitely, or a system, I definitely most relate with Taoism. That's, I think, nobody has it all the way right, but I think if someone had it right, I think they have it most right, if that's fair to say.
I think it's totally fair to say, and it's something that I'm I'm going to explore more. I think in my own show and just sort of my own thinking as this. Well, there's this idea that Taoism is kind of indigenous dharma. That's kind of the idea is that it was like a
Mm,
formulation of these other ideas that were happening in the Himalayas, but it was happening in southern and eastern China and sort of like formulating around the five emperors, and the Jade Emperor is obviously the main one, but there's others. There's the yellow, there's the red, there's a black one,
hmm
and I just think it's very fascinating, and I think an incredible alchemical system. And Chinese people are a very dragon oriented culture. The writing
hmm
and right, up and down, and you can read it in all directions. That's very dragon. So
hmm
I think that, that is definitely something that people can. I think definitely like people should just follow you on Twitter for your takes on that. You also post Saishen, which who is the one of the Chinese have a lot of wealth gods, but he is probably the primary wealth god. He could be a form of Chinese Kubera, and he's very fascinating. And I know growing up that we would often see him on altars. I didn't necessarily like have like a clear idea of his mythology or anything, but just
hmm
a very fascinating figure who is also protective. And I think
mm.
if I was going to say anything, like obviously this is your episode, but if I was going to say anything about wealth practices, that I like the idea of a deity who is also protective as well
Well,
as
yeah,
protective.
I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
I think, and this goes into a little bit of protective magic as well, is you have, and I've been getting more into this because I'm also on my own personal journey. You have to become a better person because the gods will bless you, and mostly in the forms of wealth. Well, not mostly, but in a form of wealth as well,
Hmm?
in accordance to your character and your ability to be a steward for what they're blessing you with. They're not going to
Hmm.
just waste the energy. Also, for the protection piece, if you're living your life a certain way, I think I may have tweeted this before. If you're living your life a certain way, you're not going to be in areas where all these lower deities are trying to get at you. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Your behavior is going to change what you are um, surrounding yourself with. So you won't even really need as much protection if you would stop being a terrible person. Like stop going to places where you know is low vibe. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like
Hmm.
your as you continue to raise your consciousness and you continue to add light to your soul, you continue to evolve. You shouldn't want to be around people who are doing the things that you used to do. You get what I'm saying?
I totally agree. I mean, that's where I'm at with my own personal practice is that I focus almost like 90% on Thurgy, 90% on internal alchemy, 90% on just doing my like very traditional tantric sadhanas, following the text like very closely. That's just me. I'm not saying that anyone has to do that. That's just me. But I also agree that doing those things are the most magically transformative actions externally, internally, and secretly. And so I definitely think that the doing the internal work is number one. I think you're going to get the most benefit. I think it takes longer. I don't think it comes like instantaneously, and I think it's very difficult sometimes. But I definitely in my own life have experienced greater prosperity through like sort of cleaning up my act.
You're saying the right word is work. And that's what spiritual Twitter, that's what the spiritual community is trying to avoid. And I think we talked about it earlier about the state of the community is that they're trying to avoid work. They're trying to just do a quick spell versus doing the inner work and raising their consciousness.
Okay, so we're back. Okay, so I was just saying that I think that people should not use low magic if possible. and that you work on the longer term inner theurgic practices, the benefit is so much greater. It takes so much longer, but you know what? It's worth it. And doing the low magic will, in my opinion, damage your karma and damage your blessings for the future. Now, it is fixable, but I just think that avoid the trap when you can.
I didn't think about it in that way until you said it out loud and I thought about it. But like, I think that's true because most of the time when you're operating from low magic, you're doing it in a way where you're trying to do something that is not the most evolved. And I know a lot of the things that I did when I first started, I had to go back and undo.
Mm-hmm.
I had to let people out of jars. I had to like go
Mm-hmm.
and do all of this stuff to fix what I had done, and it was low magic. I was trying to get a quick fix versus and get revenge versus seeing it from an enlightened perspective. You know what I mean? Handling it that way. So I do agree with that. That's I just never thought of it in that way.
No, and I'm not saying it from a place of like preaching or like, oh, I'm so much better. Like I've done all that too. Like 100% been there, like had to let people out of jars, exactly that. But I just will say that it just my perspective now is changed in that I just feel like the stronger connection you have, like I'm sort of non-theist, but then at the same time, obviously we have deities, we do deity practice, we do deity yoga. So obviously we do have those connections and those things and those ideas. But the stronger that you have with that practice, in my opinion, the more things move out of your way by themselves, the less dependent like the magical, extra magical works become. Doesn't mean that you'll never need them. It just means that in general, it will go a little smoother.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
So I think that's a great place to end it. Do you have any kind of like last words before you plug all your stuff?
Um, I would just say like invest in doing the work. It There's no rush. This is your life's work. Everything else you're doing is secondary, in my opinion, to your life's work, which is the evolution of your soul. And I would also say like take time to invest in your content creators, your artists, your spiritual advisors, your herbalists, and all of these people, because we're getting to a point where the system, as we like to call it, is collapsing, and you're going to need these people who develop these skill sets for your daily life. So take the time to invest in them, find somebody you trust and believe in. But yeah, that's about it.
Well, I think it was amazing. You were an amazing guest. I kind of
Thank
knew
you.
you would be. And so I just want to say thank you again. And I feel like your advice is honestly one of the best Twitter like accounts that gives advice, like gives very practical things and talks to people in like a real way and not just, oh, I'm like up here with the deities and you're down here with the mire and the masses. Like you don't really do that. And so
No,
I really appreciate that.
I like to say if I didn't have work to do down here, then I wouldn't have a body. So to pretend that I don't have like this flesh and I'm not here with y'all is hubris. It sounds silly.
I agree with you 100%. So why don't you plug all of your things, which again will be all in the show notes. I encourage people, to at least follow you on Twitter, if not like do a service or at least think about doing a service and just finding anyone that you think is valuable and investing in them. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, you can find me. I'm on Twitter, Chief Agatanahi Uktina, underscore Agatanahi Uktina. And then it's on my Gumroad, the same name. If you find me on Twitter, it's in my link tree in my bio. And that's where all my products and services are. Website coming soon. And that's all I got.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And you are welcome literally anytime you want to. If you ever want to come back and do another subject, that's totally cool with me. So,
I'll definitely be back whenever you call.
hey, this is Jin the Ninja. And if you enjoyed the show, you can Check out more episodes on Spotify and Anchor, and you can check me out on Twitter at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, and on Instagram at Threshold Saints. And there's a link tree in the show notes so you can check out all my appearances and my shows to date.